That was subtle.
Thank you. Good evening. It's 7 o'clock. We'll call the meeting to order. Karen, would you take the roll, please?
Commissioner Young. Here. Commissioner Miller.
Here.
Commissioner Brink.
Here.
Commissioner Kubal. Here. Commissioner Steeler.
Here.
Commissioner Larson.
Here.
And Chair Gerard.
Here. We ask you if you're able to please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. Chair is looking for a motion to approve the agenda as presented or with modification.
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Chair is looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda. There's one item on there.
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Aye.
Perfect.
Our regular agenda tonight is, we have no action items, we have just discussion items tonight. Threw me for a loss for a second. You still had it on there and I go, what did I miss? So we'll move to number 7. These are discussions this evening, so there'll be no public hearings. We're gonna have a few of them here. We'll start with the electronic billboards discussion. I'm not sure who's presenting.
I am Chair
Whitman, it's all
Gerard.
yours.
So included in your packet was materials regarding electronic, which we kind of call dynamic display billboards. This conversation has come before the commission in the past and city council, and based on the discussion of the city council and planning commission, staff has drafted the enclosed ordinance for early discussion with the planning commission. As a reminder for the, oh, hold on one second, my new computer and my display screen isn't working right. As a reminder for the commission, the city was petitioned by Mr. Chuck Bolcom to change the zoning code to allow for electronic billboards. Specifically, the request was to allow for a slight increase in the minimum size of billboards, to change the frequency in which dynamic display billboards would rotate or have an interval, and then also to impose a buffer distance between the dynamic display billboards. So staff has incorporated most of those recommendations into the staff report. We'll just do some of the high level, go through what I've noted in my staff report. So one of the things that we've noted is that new signs would be able to be modernized. As written, we noted that with the exception of non-conforming billboards, people can upgrade and modernize their billboards to dynamic faces. Now, that being said, one of the changes here that staff, just since this has gone out, staff would like the commission to consider is that owners or operators of billboards located on I-35 may upgrade and modernize. When we use the non-conforming billboard language, we were specifically designing to omit the billboards on those areas of the community we no longer allow them. So the Highway 61 corridor, and the code does not allow them on Highway 8. If we use the non-conforming language, it means that any billboard that does not meet our standards today would not be allowed, and it essentially would prohibit just about every single sign, because just about every single one of our billboards are non-conforming in some way. They might be slightly oversized, they might be slightly too tall, they might be a little closer to their property line than are required by the code. And so staff would propose that for discussion. That is a new change from what you had seen otherwise. Otherwise, just running through the standards that staff are proposing, that billboards may contain a single dynamic sign, no animation, no moving parts. You can change that sign every 8 seconds, but it cannot flash, scroll, change color, imitate movement. The idea is we don't want that flashing, we don't want that blinking. We really still want to kind of have that static display, but that static display is still an electronic image. They'd have sequencing that would have instantaneous repixelization. So remember the old school PowerPoints where you could pixel them from one slide to the next? I should have done it. This is on a PowerPoint. I didn't even think about it. That you wouldn't be able to change your slides on the images on the billboard that way, that you'd have to just have it flipped to the new image. It would have to have a complete message, and you can't continue that onto a subsequent image. They would be equipped and operated with an ambient light monitor. So again, as it gets darker at night, the light gets somewhat lighter, or the screen gets a little bit lighter to be able, or dimmer. During the day, they need to be lighter. At night, they need to be dimmer. Is that right? Brighter during the day, lighter at night, or darker at night. They'd be equipped with a means to turn them off in the event of malfunction. Also, they would have to turn them off within an hour or receiving notification from the city. A billboard sign would not exceed the maximum brightness level of 3-foot candles above ambient light. That is one that we talk about discussing. And then the owner or operator would need to provide to the city at no cost a minimum of 5 hours per month, and that's a minimum requirement. And those would be for community and public service messages. We also put in there that they would be a part of any state or national integrated public alert systems. So those AMBER alerts, emergency severe weather alerts, that they'd be tied right into that system, and it would be an override. So as noted in my staff report, there were a few things in our staff report, a few things that we needed to discuss. So currently in our existing standards, we require a 500-foot linear distance from all billboards. So this is static billboards today. We need to have a minimum of 500 feet between them. That is actually a very small distance between two billboards. And this commission had indicated that some people on this commission had indicated that we may want to explore how we can reduce the number of billboards along the interstate. So that's something for discussion. The applicant also proposed for dynamic billboards about a half-mile buffer distance in a radius. So the linear distance is a straight line. So if you have one billboard on one side of 35 and if it is 500 feet to the other side, there could be one directly across the way. It's kind of a unique thing. A lot of zoning codes, when they have a foot distance, it's a radius distance, as like the applicant has proposed. So a couple questions for the commission is, would the city like to increase the minimum separation between billboards? So from that 500-foot linear to something else? And is the city comfortable with the approximately half-mile radius buffer between dynamic display billboards as proposed? Included in the staff report were the static and dynamic display distances for area jurisdictions that along the 35 corridor. Chair, do you want to discuss these as we go, or would you like to come back to them after I do a presentation?
Commissioners?
Keep moving along.
Wasn't that the presentation? Okay.
Some other standards that we ask the commission to discuss tonight are extensions. Does the city want to allow for extensions on billboards? Our current ordinance does not allow for them, but this is something that we're seeing in the market as an attribute to some ordinances. So here's an example. I don't know what the movie The Expendables is, but it was better than finding the local realtor with his arms sticking out and advertising any one specific business. And then lighting, do you want to include a maximum foot candle requirement in the code? Since the time staff has sent out the staff report, we've done a little bit more research about the foot candle requirements. Most ordinances do have a very specific foot candle requirement at a set distance. We have also learned that MnDOT's standard is 0.3 foot candle at 250 feet distance. Staff would continue to recommend that 0.3 foot candle requirement, but at a 250 foot distance to be consistent with MnDOT standards. So that's all I have for your presentation tonight. We're here to chat about it. Does anyone have any questions for me?
Questions for staff? Kevin?
Abby, in the information you provided, it talks about current signs of 200 square feet in diameter or in size. What is, I thought our minimum sign, I thought our maximum sign on properties was smaller than 200 square feet. On number 3 here, you talk about, where it talks about copy signs in excess of 200 square feet in size. Maybe I'm confused.
I think that is referencing the dynamic billboards. So we allow for dynamic signs less than 200 square feet in size that are not considered a billboard.
Okay, but nothing larger than that? Is that, is there a size that's larger than that?
We
I
would,
mean-
yeah, so our current code allows for 600 square foot
Yep,
billboard
yep.
maximum. This ordinance as proposed would allow for 672 square foot billboards, and they could be changed to the dynamic.
Okay, maybe I'm not saying
I
this right.
I need to
So
find
you're
the.
talking about the distance between changeable electronic signs.
Only the billboards.
Only billboards.
So
on
like, for
35.
example, the city hall sign out here, that's electronic, that changes the display. And then we go down the street to the chiropractic office where there's another changeable electronic display. Those can be a maximum of 200 square feet, or they can be larger than that?
They're based on a different code standard completely. So I believe that and I would have to double check, I'm not as familiar with our ordinance, our sign regulations,
I'm looking.
but a lot of provisions for signs are based on maybe a percentage of wall face or the linear amount of square foot or footage and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
frontage. So some properties could potentially have up to a 200 square foot sign.
That's what I'm asking.
Like,
'cause I
I'm
don't think I've
thinking-
seen any, because that's like 10 by 20 roughly.
That's a pretty large sign.
That's changeable.
But I'll have to look at the,
Maybe.
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chair?
Yes.
Reading the current sign code, in the commercial, most of the commercial districts, wall signs, maximum size is 200 square feet. And most of the code says no more than 50% of that can be electronic or changeable.
Okay, that's 100 square feet then.
But then what about monument signs? Those are wall signs. What about
Yeah.
monument signs?
Freestanding signs are generally either 40 or 80 square feet max, depending on the size of the building, the size of the property. And again, no more than 50% of those sign faces
So
can be
that's why-
dynamic
So
display.
that's why I'm raising this. I'm just thinking that, to me, that would have to change, that 200 square foot sign, electronic sign, changing sign, because we don't allow it currently, I don't think.
This part of the ordinance is only for the billboards on 35. So everything in the city, we got to deal at a later date.
So the
This is
ref-
only the billboards.
so the reference that you have, Commissioner Miller, is the original applicant's proposal
Yep.
was that there would be a buffer different distance
Yep, I know.
for anything in excess of 200 square feet in size. What we've done is instead of using that 200 square feet in size, we have said, hey, billboards, if you're gonna be dynamic, we believe you should have XYZ buffer, and that's still something that's up.
So, but we don't, my point is, we don't have anything on the corridor then that's that small.
No,
Okay, that's what I'm trying to
No.
figure out, okay.
not that we're aware of.
Okay.
And we've removed that 200 square feet because we're just saying this applies to billboards, not necessarily signs in excess of 200 square feet.
Just didn't say that, so that's why I
Yeah,
was concerned.
yeah, I understand now. I pulled up the staff report. I see where you're referencing.
Other questions of staff? Otherwise, I think we ought to have the discussion on distance between billboards. That's one of the questions this evening. Karen? I'm sorry, Karen, you're not Karen. Susan, thinking of Karen, and she gets her notes straight, and I'm looking at you.
I did have a few questions. In the report, you kind of go back and forth between dynamic billboards and billboards, so I was having a little bit of a hard time understanding which provisions you want to have for billboards and which for dynamic billboards. So as we go through, if I get the wrong one, just let me know. So are you looking for all billboards, dynamic or not, to be permitted 672 square feet? Or is
Yes.
it just dynamic?
All.
All billboards.
All right. You talk about that all dynamic display billboards shall be equipped with a means to immediately turn off the display in the event of a sign malfunction. So you will be requiring SCADA or some other continuously monitored telemetry on each of these billboards, correct? And how will you enforce that?
We will not have some sort of monitoring system in-house. It's upon discovering of the violation.
Relying on the installers and manufacturers to,
So, but you are going to be requiring that they have some sort of telemetry or SCADA or something on that sign, because otherwise they would have no way of knowing whether or not it's malfunctioning. Because you're using the term immediately turn off in the event of a sign malfunction.
Commissioner Young, I don't know what you mean when you say telemetry or SCADA. All of these will be run by their manufacturer or by the operator. They will have a direct feed connection to the devices.
What I mean by telemetry is water towers and things like that have sensors on them so that if the water level drops suddenly, an alarm sounds someplace that is monitored on a regular basis. SCADA is the most well-known, but my concern is that if we have an ordinance that we're gonna require this, then we need to make sure that in our ordinance, they have a way of knowing when it's malfunctioning, that is monitored someplace.
if I may, Mr. Chair, I'm guessing the applicant will be able to fill in that blank.
And then on the page where the question is, would the city like to increase the minimum separation between billboards? Is that between billboards or between dynamic billboards or all billboards?
Both. The inquiry is, so right now our code says 500 distance between billboards. Do we want to increase that? And then what is being proposed is a 2,600-foot distance between dynamic billboards. Are we comfortable with that? Would we like less or greater?
So you would have two measurements?
We have two measurements.
Like you, dynamic, regular, dynamic. Actually, dynamic, regular, dynamic.
Potentially, yes.
And then when you may have already thought about this, but if we're talking about extensions, are you looking at a maximum size or a maximum percent of the billboard space? Or how would you think about that?
In the staff report, it noted that many communities allow for 15 to 20% increases above the square footage. And so that was what it's just, that is what other communities are doing. We don't have any currently. Staff isn't necessarily proposing anything, but since we were looking at our billboard regulations, we thought, what are other ways that we're maybe not as consistent with some of the other neighboring communities? We're not necessarily advocating to change that. It's just, if we'd want to, now would probably be the time to consider that.
Currently, we do not allow for extensions.
We currently do not right now.
And there's nothing saying we have to.
Right, that helps me. Thank you.
Kevin, do we currently know the distance between our billboards that are out on the corridor now? And if we changed it, let's say, have to remove those billboards?
It
Or
would,
they be grandfathered in?
they'd be grandfathered in. So if they elected to remove one, then that, you know, and there was another within 500 feet or another with, let's say we established a greater distance, they would not be able to replace it. They'd be able to replace like for like as a maintenance option. But if they elected to just remove it outright, it would never come back. So it can be a strategy to help reduce the overall number. But again, that is based on a property owner and operator's election to remove it. I do have it. Yep, it was included in your
Oh,
packet,
sorry,
but
I'm
I'll
sorry,
pull
I
it
didn't
right
look
back
at
up.
that. I apologize.
That's okay.
And so if I may, Mr. Chair, there currently are no billboards on the west side of 35 town?
Hey.
Not that I'm aware of. They're all on the east side. And so part of our thinking and for the commission to think about, depending on how the standards are written, especially the spacing standards, we have to treat that as a radius and not just necessarily a linear line. So there's the potential that billboards could come in on the west side. And so we want you to be thinking about that as we look at these standards. If one of the car dealerships works out a deal to give up 50 square feet of their ground for a billboard, depending on how we write the spacing requirements, then
Or they could put their own billboard up.
there's the map. Show.
So from Broadway and 35, there's approximately 4,200 feet, a little less than 4,200 feet to 11th. Here is our about 2,000 foot mark. So you can see that several of them are probably, you know, might be at that 500 or even less. Here we've got a little bit greater of a spacing, well over 1,000 square feet, but then we're probably back to about that 500 in this area here. There are two others further north that's not included on this map. I inadvertently neglected to include that. We have received inquiries for others along the corridor. I'm not, you know, the people are asking, I guess there's money to be had in billboards, so.
So can you explain that 2,000 foot mark again? What
It's just, the 2,000 foot mark is about that halfway distance between right now. And so just for rough comparison, the 2,000 foot is just a scale reference in that that's about your halfway mark. So between these 2,000 feet, we've got 5 billboards. So roughly they are about $450 a piece maybe.
So that's less than a mile from 11th to the Broadway then?
It is less than a mile as per this measurement. I mean, I haven't, this was submitted by the applicant. I didn't verify it, but I trust that standard mapping platforms.
When I used to be doing 80 driving home, it didn't seem that far. Susan?
I've noticed that Columbus and White Bear Township have started requiring the billboards in those cities in the township to, I don't want to say dress up, but make better looking the bases with either stonework or brick or, you know, something that makes them look not quite as obnoxious. Industrial. And as you've looked through the ordinance and you're considering changes to the billboard ordinance, is that also under consideration?
It has not been at this time. That's not to say that this commission can't recommend something. You know, by your next meeting, we'll have an ordinance for formal consideration. So I think that we need to know if that's something that you'd like to include into it.
They do really look nice in White Bear Township there. Oh, that was required.
Columbus has also started doing the same thing. They look much better. Have a pride of place.
But again, I think that could only apply to new billboards. I don't think we could make a owner retrofit an existing.
If they made a significant improvement to the billboard, such as installing a dynamic sign, sort of like we do asking, you know, non-conforming houses, if you make a significant improvement, we want you to bring it up to code.
We can check with our legal team on that one, just to verify.
Let's come back to our distance then, since that's kind of what we've been having here is a distance discussion. The city is looking for our input on both the static display and the dynamic display. And personally, I'm fine with the radius versus a linear. It makes a lot of sense to me, but opinions?
Chair Gerard,
Distance.
is that radius on, between dynamic or radius between all?
Chair Gerard, Commissioner Young, if I may, I would recommend that we have a single standard. Either we go linear or we go radius. We don't necessarily have two separate measurements in the same ordinance. And staff would recommend that it is a radius. It's an industry standard generally in planning and zoning. When you measure in a radial fashion. I'm not sure why there's linear in the code, other than people saw it as a linear roadway and thought, I'm not sure, but
How many can we stick in that line that we're traveling?
I saw a lot of heads nodding at the radius, so I have enough direction there.
So if we were looking at a 500-foot linear as an example, but we're 4
There'd be,
dynamic billboards within,
there'd be approximately 4 along the I-35 corridor total in our boundary.
it's in that short distance.
Just in that short distance, you'd only have 2.
Unless they went on the other side, because you're talking radius now, right?
Well, if you're talking radius, you wouldn't be able to have them in that radius. So you'd be measuring, in a full circle around.
One in that radius.
Only one in that radius. So you'd have between the Broadway and 11th and Broadway, you'd end up with potentially one at 11th, and then another one 2,600 feet or closer to Broadway. And then likely you'd be able to get another one north of there as well. So I'm not sure if you could have another one south of 11th. I haven't done that measurement yet. I'd imagine you could if it was an area that was zoned, but a lot of that's Columbus, so.
Yeah, and just to clarify too, the way the ordinance is written, the billboards are only allowed in the B2 and the B3 zoning district along the freeway. So even getting north of Broadway, it cuts off, and then we have residential and service zoning as you go up towards Highway 8. So that area is not eligible for any billboard of any type.
In its current fashion. Current zoning.
And I'm still looking to understand if the 2,600-foot radius would be for any billboard or just dynamic billboards?
Well, that's what we're looking for direction on.
Any.
The current standard for our code is 500 feet for any billboard. The applicant was not proposing to change that. We're questioning if that needs to be changed. The applicant was proposing a 2,600-foot distance for dynamic billboards. So just looking at I have in kind of the standards that we have in our neighboring communities, 2,600 would end up being more restrictive for static display than any of our adjacent communities. We'd be almost twice as,
Except Columbus.
or dynamic. But for static display signs, we would be more than almost twice as much.
So just trying to,
Mhm.
that would mean if we said 2,600 feet radius, there could be no billboards on basically the west side of 35.
Dynamic billboard.
Oh, if we change it for all of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that would be correct.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Left it at linear, potentially there could be a bunch on that side.
Well, at 2,600,
But I mean, if we made it 1,000 linear or whatever,
maybe. I mean, linear is still going to mean across the highway. So somebody's going to have to really kind of do that angled measurement of 500 from one and 500 from the other to see if they get that.
but most
I'm-
cities are doing radius.
Yeah, I'm assuming that we don't have as many along the west side of the interstate because it's probably less than 500 feet distance between from one side of the interstate to the other.
Be a lot of contemplating
We
going on.
open discussion on this? Okay, I have well, I'm just looking at these other cities, Vadnais, White Bear Township. Both the static and the dynamic have same distance. And that would seem to make sense to me, I don't know why we would have, the ambient light is very low on these. Why would we want a different standard? Whatever we come to, I would just make it the same for both.
That would make-
I am in favor of closer together too. I mean, once you've littered the highway with these things, what's it matter? I am not a billboard fan.
Neither am I, so I would have fewer just because I'm. not
I'd
a
like
fan.
fewer, but like I say, once you've got 2, 3, 4 up there, what's it matter? You know, it's, once you've spoiled the well, I mean, one more dead squirrel in there, and, so, yeah, it doesn't make a difference to me.
Well, when this came up, I never really saw the old billboards at all. So I drove the freeway once and it's like, holy crap, there's a lot of them. But I like this idea of being able to change the message and getting out public service announcements. And that to me is what's really driving me to be more in favor of this, because we do have a way to get a message out about things that are important to our community with more billboards that are kind of already there anyway. And I was really surprised that I'd never noticed the other ones. I completely disregarded them until this. So that might happen with these static ones, but if the message becomes something that I want to read because now it affects me and my community, and I can find out that there's a missing child, or that there's an event at the city, or we have to change our watering habits because we've went into some kind of watering ban, all those things are important to the community, and it can get a lot of people. So that's my thought.
So in order to do that, you would want to have in the ordinance when the city messages would be. Because if they were all, I mean, that many hours, they could all be between 2:30 a.m. and 4 a.m.
I think Abby had a note in there about them being spread throughout the day. Didn't I read something on that?
That is correct.
Yes.
Similar to the other messages or something.
It was like onto the next page, but it was.
Num-
it was that
number
they were
8
spread
has the
evenly.
standards.
But that would be important.
Yeah, but I think this is actually a great tool that we can use to get messages out that can change as the needs change.
Mr. Chair, if I may, to Geneva's point, if the ordinance is adopted with, say, the 2,600-foot radius spacing of dynamic billboards, city may end up, there may only be 2, maybe 3 in the city. That's then limits the number of places that message could be projected. Where if you have it at 1,000 feet or 1,500 feet, maybe there's 4 or 5. There's that many more billboards that could be changed to dynamic display that could allow for the message to get out. So there's a little trade-off there to be aware of.
I might argue that the folks that are zooming on 35 are probably not the Forest Lake residents that we would be wanting to target, as much as our Forest Lake residents tend to look at our sign outside City Hall. And that was one of my concerns about when we were talking about it originally, that there might be a benefit to the city for city businesses. But when I look at the signs, there are very few of them that are benefiting Forest Lake. So
You mean
we're stuck with the litter,
Yeah.
but
You mean the location of them don't benefit the people who actually live here, or?
the Mystic Lake signs, the, whatever the casino is north of here, the what's-his-face signs, those aren't signs that benefit either Forest Lake businesses or the Forest Lake community.
True enough, but with static messaging, then that message can change. And now all of a sudden it does become relevant to the people of Forest Lake. That's
And-
part of the point.
Right, and that's why I like that piece that was, that staff included in the ordinance, that having at least some benefit.
Well, and the other thing is I think it actually makes the cost of ads cheaper for local businesses now because it's not 24/7, it's shared. And now you're picking a percentage of time on that board. So now all of a sudden, what used to cost maybe $5,000 or $10,000 might cost a few hundred. I don't know what those breakdowns are, but there might be businesses now that can afford that little small message. And that is local. And they're using it in restaurants and all these different things, these static messages that are playing around on their TVs. And we're seeing a lot more local advertising on those local messages, and people are seeing them. So I kind of really think that this is, as much as I might think the billboards are terrible, I think it's really getting out some good messages for local things.
One note on the, all of those billboards, if you exit at Highway 97, as I do, you don't see any of them. So, and there's a lot of people in Forest Lake that exit at 97.
1/thousandths of the time.
What?
Of local messaging.
Oh.
Or city-
So, back to some of my questions.
Well, if I can weigh
Yeah.
off for 2 minutes, I know the applicant's here. It's not a public hearing, but if you want to spend a couple minutes giving us your thoughts, and then we'll make you go sit back down.
Thank you, Chair Gerard. I was like at the edge of my seat a
And,
couple
and,
of times.
and I'll, and I'll
You
need your
guys
name and
sensed that.
address for the record,
You
please.
bet. Chair Gerard, I'm Chuck Bolcom, and I live at 6287 West Shadow Lake Drive in Lino Lakes. And glad to be back here, and nice to see you for the first time, Commissioner Larson. I think a couple of, maybe you have some questions, but I just captured some of your questions, and so maybe I address a couple of quick things. Commissioner Young, the 672 that you asked about, is it for both? Again, that was to that industry standard. Most of the signs, or all of those signs on Highway 35 are right at 600. As we talked about last time, when they go to 672, they're not going to be any wider. They're just going to be a little bit taller, and that will be for both of those. And so I just point that out because I think it's a small move, but it lets the billboard operator operate at that 14 by 48 that advertisers put messages together on in that space. You asked about a monitor or a camera and the way in which you describe monitoring the water tower. So these digital billboards are designed with cameras on both sides. If you look at the digital signs on the freeway, you'll notice that long extension in the front of every one of those billboards. You'll start to notice that now. That has a camera on the end of it, and as the billboard operator, I'm able to pull that up at any time to make sure the device is working properly, the sign is on, and if requested to turn it off, I'll be able to see that I'm turning it off when that happens. I think that, maybe we could talk about light. Did we talk about light, or just maybe talk about distance? But the notion of these digital billboards having an automatic dimmer that is on these signs. And so I think staff did a really good job of saying, I think they did an excellent job in the way they wrote it at 0.3 foot candles, and they have an automatic dimmer. Then they were going to ask you the question, should it be more restrictive than that, Chair Gerard? And my comment to staff was, these billboards have been being manufactured for about 15 years. There's 3 primary manufacturers of those signs that have worked in hundreds of municipalities to get that light correct, that will work in communities regardless of where they are in the community. And the industry standard they've come up with is the 0.3 foot candle with that automatic dimming that happens right when you go from sun to sunset. The light comes down because it's not as much light needed, and you end up with something that works for the community. The other thing that will happen is whether I install a digital board or someone else does, we're not going anywhere. And you're going to be able to comment in the future about did we get that right? Does this one feel too bright for where it is? And I think there's a chance to have a conversation, but I think these are designed by the manufacturers to kind of meet what communities have needed all over the country. And so that was the feedback I shared with Ken and Abby. I'd go with the industry standard. I think you did it right. You did your research on that. And so that's my comment on light. The comment I was going to make about distance, I think when we were together last month, Commissioner Stellar, you said, I actually want these to go, I wish they would go away. How do we make them go away? So I appreciate your comments tonight, and I appreciate your comments tonight about economic development. I think the sense I got the last time I was here and with the city council was that there was this sense of, we don't want necessarily more billboards. And so the feedback I gave on the 500 feet and the 2,600 that I recommended, again, I was looking at other ordinances to find what makes sense in other communities. I've done the math in B2 and B3 on both sides of the freeway. And if you're at 500 feet, you have an opportunity potentially to have another 3 to 5 billboards on that corridor. And so that's just feedback. If you move towards 800-900 feet, you end up pretty much where you are now from a static billboard standpoint. I don't have any dog in that fight, right? I'm providing that feedback. And I was really trying to do that research so I knew what was there, but I also wanted to comment to that sense you had the last time we were together, like, what is this gonna mean and where are we gonna go in terms of number of billboards? And my sense on the buffer was, again, that notion of, does the community want, do you want 7 of those in a row, and what will that look like? We don't necessarily know what that will look like. And so I looked at the Columbus ordinance, which I think is a pretty good standard. And I looked at other ordinances, and I came up with that number to really respond to the notion of, we don't necessarily want a great deal of these. And so I just have one last comment, and then maybe I'll tell a joke. We talked last time about businesses having more access to, local businesses having more access to more of this inventory. And so, Commissioner, I agree with that. And we also talked a lot about the public service piece. And I think the public service messages have to run at a time people are going to see them, right? They can't run in day parts when no one's out there. And so I think just from this applicant's standpoint, it's a false promise if you don't run the messaging or run enough of the messaging when people are going to be impacted by the public service message. And that's not what my intention is. And secondarily, you got to call on local businesses to make sure that they can unlock the ability to advertise their businesses. You need to call them in a way in which they have lots of entry points and lots of ideas. And so as a local business person, I'm an applicant from an advertiser responsiveness standpoint that's going to allow that. And I think you asked a question, Commissioner Kubel, about what does this do to pricing, right? I don't believe this is the kind of thing that gets this down into a few $100s a month for an advertiser. But because you've got lots of ways to use this inventory, you're going to be able to deal with businesses that are on this corridor right here that are smaller businesses, as well as Menards or Culver's or folks that just have a higher turn. So I am back to community service and entry points for advertisers. And I think the third benefit we talked about last time, the citizens are just going to have more information. So I'm appreciative that you're
Don't run away.
Okay.
Now that we allowed you to speak, we're going to batter
Okay.
you with a few
Very good.
questions, I'm sure. So, Susan?
What are your thoughts on digital, static, digital, static? What are the competition, both visual and in terms of advertiser competition and the ability to actually see messages?
Yeah. I think that, so there are a couple of different answers here. I think we're all consumers of images, right? And I think if you, on the east side of the highway, if you had 4 digitals out of those 6 signs, you'd have some outcomes where I think you've just got too much, I think you're going to be in a situation where you're going to feel like it's too much when you get done with it. It's going to feel like more like Times Square than it does a road in a community, right, on your way through Washington County up north or whatever that might be. So that's some feedback. I think that would mean there'd be a lot of inventory, right? And lots of inventory where you maximize the inventory to a point where you've got 4x of that inventory in that spot. I think that, frankly, I think you've got some business challenges for potentially business owners of those signs, just having an opportunity to fill those signs in the right way, and have businesses succeed. So that's an honest feedback on if you ended up with 5 digitals out there. There's some sense, Commissioner Young, of disincentivizing investing, spending the capital that, for instance, I'm going to spend. If I knew there were going to be 5 digital signs in a row out there, you begin to try to understand whether or not that makes sense for any one of those players, just because it's a lot. And that's not me being anti-competitive. I think you probably sensed this time and last time I'm an honest broker. I think that's the business answer. I think the other thing that does is it deteriorates the value of those static signs that are left there too, because now you've got this well of digital inventory. So that's my feedback. Is that what the question was directed at?
Geneva?
Well, I was kind of wondering if we go with like this dynamic imaging, would some signs just become obsolete and actually go away because they no longer are like functional because they only have one message?
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden that one message can be on this dynamic message, which would make it kind of go away because the message gets there another way.
Yeah. Superb question. And I touched on in my many comments last time, that there are advertisers that won't run on a digital board because they want to dominate that screen, right? And they want to be there. And I'll give an example. We have a new truck convenience gas player, Love's. They have 450 of these around the country. Someone I'm going to call on. And the thing I think is Love's not going to want to be on this sign I'm going to build. And the reason is they want to reach every truck that comes by, not every 8th truck. So there are many advertisers. I think that, again, the fuel category, we're on highways, right? Quick Trip is just a tremendous community partner and a big user of outdoor space. They want to be on static signs. Those static signs are going to be very healthy, and those businesses that own those will do very well regardless of the fact that there's a digital there. And so that's the way I think about it in terms of the mix. And that's why you have large independents in the state of Minnesota that don't have any digital. Their whole plan is static because their business strategy is the value of that. So that was a longer answer than you needed. But
Any other questions? Thank you for.
I do have a question on the specific sign that you brought to our attention in the last meeting was the very first one as you come north, right? The southernmost one, right over 11th Avenue. That was the one. So my concern on that sign being illuminated is 11th Avenue, because you are a lot closer to that sign than someone on the 35 corridor. And how does that affect things? And
yeah, Commissioner Stoller, and I've thought about that. That is the sign that I'm proposing to put digital on both sides. If we drove the metro, there are many, many instances where you see a sign that's over a overpass like that. The sign is pointing out towards the highway. That driver coming west on 11th, they're going to see that sign, but the distraction won't be any more than any other visual that's there, including the visual that's there with those 4 lights shining up on it, right? So it's already there. We're replacing it with an image that's just different, pointing out at the highway. The drivers coming east on 11th, they won't, they will be the same as it is now. There are those 4 lights shooting up at that. The light will just come off the digital, and really the amount of sky glow that's coming off of both of those is similar. In fact, just from a I didn't even know the word sky glow until about a week ago, but the light coming off of those lights going into the sky, these digital signs produce less community light pollution than those great signs because the lights are shooting up at them. But I have thought about that, and I've driven other digital signs. County Road J, that is in Blaine, near where I live. There's a large sign right above the overpass on J, which is Ash. When you go over, it's the same situation. It's right there. And we talked about safety in the past, right? This starts with a safety question. I think it's de minimis versus the light that's there. So I have considered that, and you know, Commissioner, that's one of the things I hope we get into, right? Is we you know, once we're there, and we look what we do with the looms on both sides. If somehow it doesn't feel right, then we'll address the foot candle on that side if it becomes a concern. Just a comment about that sign. I love that sign for what you're talking about, Commissioner, which is there are no billboards for about 1.5 miles or 2 until maybe it's shorter than that, but you go a long ways before you see that sign. And now you come into really Forest Lake after the split, and that sign is there, and that sign's been there for probably 30 years. What's going to be different is rather than that sign that's lit with those 4 lights, you're going to have a very impressive state-of-the-art sign that's going to be sharing messages about, you know, many, many different things, including the community. And so that's something that I get excited about and the opportunity to do that.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Reeling her back in. Kevin?
Abby, Ken, I don't see anything in here which talks about illumination on both sides of a sign. Something that is typical, or is that something that has to be addressed? My assumption was we were illuminating one side of a sign, not both sides of a sign.
There was some discussion at this level and some discussion at the council level as well. The code right now reads that when you have a back-to-back sign, it's one sign.
Back-to-back sign.
Or we've even considered I think our B is the same way, but we did not write this as if they would be able to do only one side.
Saying that both sides of a single billboard, where in the past it's been 2 billboards back to back.
Well, it's technically in the way the code is written, the billboard structure is we hadn't necessarily, I don't know that the city had been considering them 2 separate billboards themselves. I can see where it's interpreted that way because you have 2 620 square feet images and they could be different. But that's certainly something that we can clarify better.
I would concur. I was confused in here whether I had single-sided signs or both-side signs.
I think it was intended to be for both-sided signs, but if there's confusion on this commission, there certainly would be confusion with the public, so we'll make sure to clarify that.
Well, you know,
If
Kevin
I'm-
and I aren't necessarily the brightest guys,
No,
so,
no,
you know, most people may understand it.
Commissioner, Paul, on its new section E is the size and distance limitations. The second sentence there says 2 facings per structure shall be the maximum permitted.
Where we
Double
at?
face signs shall be attached back to back.
Yeah.
So that's existing language in the ordinance where the 600 changes to 672. So all along, one structure is allowed 2 sign faces.
But we can clarify that a little bit better to make sure that if we impose a buffer distance, that it's not prohibiting, you know, the back side of one sign. So if we've got a single structure and we have 2 faces on it, that buffer distance would be precluding that other side of that billboard structure. If we've got a back-to-back sign and it's got 2 faces and we impose, let's just say, a 500-foot buffer distance, that our 500-foot buffer distance from one side isn't precluding the sign on the other
right.
side.
Really,
Okay.
we have to measure it from the column that's holding up the 2 faces.
But you could be having 2 different dimensions if one was dynamic and one was static.
They would both be a maximum of 672 because the
No,
six.
but if we end up with two different dimensions for dynamic and static billboards, if
We're
one
not-
side of the billboard was static, we would measure that side for static and the other side for dynamic.
Both of the standard billboard size is being proposed to 672. Doesn't matter if it's standard or static or dynamic.
Are you talking the spacing?
The spacing between them.
between.
I'm on the 672, that's fine, but if we have two different spacings, one for dynamic
Oh,
billboards, one
I
for
see.
static billboards, if one side's dynamic and one side's static, depending what side we're standing on, you get a different dimension, correct?
I'm going to guess, educated guess, that if someone goes to or an owner operator goes to the trouble to put up one dynamic display face, that they will do both at the same time,
It's a mood issue is what you're thinking.
I think. But
But we can clarify that in the ordinance that comes back before you.
I just have no idea what these signs cost, if it's rocks you for two sides, kind of cheap. I might want to see if one side works first.
Yeah, but you're brighter than 0.3-foot candles, I'll tell you that.
3 or 0.3?
0.3, that's what it is. 0.3.
You don't have to jump in. All right, bringing it back, let's go back to,
Susan had questions.
oh, I'm sorry, Susan.
While we're talking about face in that section F, you might want to say billboards may contain a single dynamic sign image per face. All right, because otherwise, billboard, not the face.
We certainly
I,
can.
I think that's where you were going, so I just.
Yeah, I think, well, we can find some ways to clarify that.
But staff would rather have static and dynamic distance to be the same, correct? I got that part.
I don't, the way we measure them would be very nice to have consistency. It
Oh,
is
just where you first
uncommon in other jurisdictions to have two separate distance requirements. Columbus is the only city that does.
We'll come back to dimension, but in number 7 of your ordinance, 0.3-foot candles.
Yes.
I'm always used to a 0 being in front of a decimal point.
Yes, it should be.
And I know there's another engineer on here that would probably concur with me, that should always have a 0 in front of a decimal point.
Always. Because that decimal will get lost somewhere in a photocopy or something.
Sure. We can incorporate that for sure.
Just a
I didn't
little,
know we were getting that picky with the.
That is,
I see it
That's a
though,
general
you
rule
weren't
that-
the only one, Commissioner Steeler.
it just, one of those things that grates on me.
Yes, yes. I agree.
As a nurse, I can say we have to have the 0 in front of the decimal point, so.
All right, we need to come back. If you could put up the
I
distance,
am right now.
thank you. And come to agreement on what we think this distance should be between signs and whether we want a separate distance between dynamic and static, or if we want to have it the same throughout our billboards.
Would there be a general agreement that 2,600 for static would be a bit too much? That if we did it the same, it would be, what?
Yeah, well, I think that I could agree with the 2,600 for the changeable movable. I grant that we have signs out there that are at 500 feet. But realizing that these ordinances are for the future, I would like our static signs to be more than 500 feet. In other words, as somebody tears one down, or it blows down, or it was tornadoed or something. Anybody here remember the Monkey Wrench Gang? Or Monkey Wrench Gang, Google it. I think that I'd rather be closer to, 800 or 1,000 on the statics than I am to 500. And
Well, if I understand it right, if we go with 2,600, we get one other dynamic in Forest Lake.
We'd have two. We'd have to, I think it'd be three total. It's 3 or 4 total at
There'll be
2,600.
another one probably near Broadway and then another one north of Broadway.
Just told me the district north of Broadway, you can't put them on there.
There's a couple of spots where there are,
So you would actually probably have one just south of Broadway and then to the north of there. There is a little bit of land area to the north. There is also land area farther north that is zoned right now residential, but if it was petitioned to be rezoned in the future, they would be eligible as well.
Isn't there a billboard right on Broadway, right now, currently?
Yes.
And 26, if it was 2,600 diameter, wouldn't that bring us all the way up to 8?
No,
About a quarter mile?
that's
I can,
getting close.
2,600 feet is a half mile.
yeah.
But it's only about a quarter mile.
No, it's longer than that,
It is?
actually.
So here's our map area.
Saying the radius
So-
at 2,600.
Right.
So your diameter would be about 5,000.
But they're really all just radius measurements. So
Right.
we're down at 11th here with, and 20, I only got 4,000 feet between there and
Right.
Broadway, so I get
You'd-
one.
You'd maybe end up with one here, maybe, depending if that operator wanted to. Likely under the new code, you could get another one in right here because there's probably not less than, under the existing code, 500 feet between these two. You'd end up with one, could end up with one here. And then there are 2 more to the north that probably have that 2,600 foot separation.
So we think we have 5,200 feet between 11th and Broadway?
Between 11th and Broadway, we have 4135.
I get one other one in there.
You could get
20.
one other one in there. You might be able to get, yes, you could get one other one in there. And then one more. You're 3.
One more north of Broadway,
North of Broadway, yes.
if we rezone.
Well, no, there's a little section,
There is, I don't have that map up at the moment. I'd have to unplug and pull it.
But I guess my point is, I'm okay if we squeeze them up a little bit, as my esteemed colleague Don says, we've already got them. You know, I'm fine with 1,500 or 2,000 feet, and
So at 2,000 feet, just as a, again, here's one that we currently have an application in for. Probably one more in the middle, one of these two, one more up here, and potentially the other one up to the north of there. So you could end up with above 4 in a community
What's that, 2,000?
at 2,000.
So even considering it's a radius,
well, really, it's just half a circle.
What,
because it really doesn't matter, there's none on the west side of the freeway then.
we're looking in a 360, so we're measuring out our 2,600 round.
In reality, though, we're going on the freeway, it is pretty close to linear. It's a 2,600.
We could call it linear. I mean, it
No,
doesn't
no,
matter
no,
to
I
me.
think radius is the proper, but in reality, though, right,
But some of the
It's pretty
billboards,
straight
some of the
right there.
billboards are
But
more
it would
further
be
away
different
from
on
the
west
highway.
side,
right,
Because it
there's
would
none
be
on the west
less-
side.
It
Yeah.
would, it would continue to be down the west side because it's, you know,
Within the radius.
yeah.
Right.
So Chair, if I might, I'm hearing from the commission that you agree with a radial or 360-degree measurement, that having the same measurement for both, just for consistency, and that something a little less than 2,600, but certainly more than 500, maybe around that 18 to 2,000, so that we could possibly have up to 4, is about the area that you're thinking would be acceptable. I see a lot of
Yes.
heads nodding.
I'm
I
closer
only-
to the 2,000.
Oh, and that's fine. So I said 1,800 to 2,000, I think. This still has to go for one. We're gonna have one more final discussion with the council before we draft the ordinance. So I think right now, staff at least has the direction to pull together this. We probably won't amend this ordinance too much for the council, but actually just kind of have them comment based on the commission's kind of discussion. Is that an acceptable, I mean, I think that that's a really good approach right now, since we're still working in this policy development realm.
Yeah.
and I'm okay with the .03 candles, and I'm not a big fan of.
0.3.
Or 0.3. Yeah, 0.3.
0.3.
And I'm not a fan of the extensions.
You
Yep.
know,
Oh, I guess we didn't talk about that.
Yeah,
did we?
agreed.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the extensions either.
Extensions are out.
All right, so the questions I think that we had for the commission have been answered when it comes to the buffer distance, extensions, and lighting.
And-
So essentially, just a summary one more time, that we'd measure everything the same with that circular at 1,800 to 2,000, somewhere in there. That we would not allow extensions, and the 0.3 would be a sufficient lighting standard in the code.
At the 250 feet or whatever it is. And can you inform us how many of our billboards would conform with the setbacks?
None of our, I don't think any of, we have several of our billboards, most of our billboards do not conform with this
That's close
existing
enough.
setbacks.
I just want, that's what I thought, but I go, well, maybe I don't know where the highway right-of-way ends. but I
Right,
go,
which
boy,
is
those
why
things-
staff had proposed, right in the beginning, that conversation a little bit about written, it's saying the non-conforming billboards, where we'd like to say billboards located along 35 may modernize.
And can we, to Susan's point, can we dress these up a little bit at future?
I was gonna ask if there's a consensus about that.
I did hear you'd like them, us to take a look at least for upgrade improvement for the base of them. And then also I did hear, wasn't another direction. Yeah, I do have that in here. There's something I missed, Jeff?
Good? Commissioners, are we, I had enough discussion on this?
Oh, yeah.
One thing you will learn on this commission is signs are brutal and they're all long meetings. So, welcome to the commission, Jeff. We will move on to item 7B, zoning ordinance rewrite discussion.
Speaking of long and brutal, I'm sorry. Is that, oh, I just put it all in the same. So zoning ordinance rewrite, as I noted in my staff report, the city council has dedicated funds this year to start working on a rewrite of the zoning code. The project was not fully funded, so we envision this to be a 2-year project. And as staff is looking at how we break out this project and maximize our time and our efforts in 2023, then 2024, wanted to bring this just to the commission for some high-level direction, thoughts that the commission has before we really start scoping that project out a little bit better. So just some quick reasons for the rewrite. The number one thing selfishly from Ken and I's perspective is the current code is very difficult to administer. I think I've mentioned to this commission before that it looks like when the city annexed the township, that there was a whole lot of marrying of codes. As part of that, there got to be just a lot of code sections in different places that will talk about the same things. Wouldn't say there's always conflict, but there's a lot of different sections of the code that you have to know exist for one thing: landscaping requirements, design requirements. They're patchwork all throughout the code. That and a patchwork of amendments. So tonight we talked about billboards, right? We've done this over the years, and we've done little segments here and there. And it doesn't look like the city, I'm not going to say anybody, maybe did the most comprehensive analysis of, oh, we're changing landscaping standards. Control find, whereas everywhere that we say landscaping, are we really hitting all the spots in the code? Are we creating conflicts? So that's been very difficult for staff to administer. A lot of times when somebody says, what do I have to do? We spend quite a bit of time just trying to figure out what do all the different code sections say about this one thing. In that administration difficulty has created some just regulatory oversight. Like there isn't a lot of gaps. It's actually a lot more oversight. There's some processes and procedures that I would say now are easily administered on a local by staff. Some of the processes and procedures, it's clear the city or the township, I'm not sure who, created when there might have only been a commission and it might have only been volunteers, reviewing things. Now with modern technology and staff and all the things to help you, we think that there's ways that we can possibly make it easier to kind of get us through get property owners and applicants through some processes. Not saying all of them, but I think there's opportunities to review them and streamline some of these processes. And then community consistency. The city code and our zoning districts are not consistent with our 2040 comprehensive plan. Our comprehensive plan might say that a specific district is intended to be pedestrian and walkable, but then when you go to that underlying zoning district, it talks about, drive-throughs and parking lots, and there's things in there that need to be really reworked to really represent the 2040 comp plan and their community values. So tonight, all that we're gonna really do is brainstorm. Staff included a few questions in here for the commission, and this is just kind of a please help us, provide direction for us in terms of if there's any processes and procedures the commission thinks have been good or need more or less oversight. Over the years, has there been any sort of abundance of certain kinds of variances, types of uses that you've reviewed in the past that you think that might not have been necessary, or we've seen so many, maybe we should look at changing the regulations on those? Are there areas of the zoning or subdivision ordinances that when they've been presented to you, you've either been confused or caused alarm? And then in general, what are some of the areas you'd like the opportunity to have greater discussion opposed to others? So because this is a 2-year project, really balancing out that work is going to be important. And by work, I mean the budget, right? But the workload and making sure that we're not overloading us this year with high discussion topics, and then next year we breeze through it. Really trying to balance that workload out a little bit so that we might have some heavy discussion topics, then we go through some really quick light things. That sort of thing, to really understand really what's important to this commission. These are conversations that we'll have as well with the city council. From there, we'll start scoping out what that project and program looks like. Commissioner involvement, public involvement, community engagement, engaging with outside consulting, our legal team, all of those things. And it'll be back before we actually even start working on this at all. But tonight was really just a brainstorm from the commission. We're just looking to get some guidance from you. Many of you have been here a lot longer than Ken and I have, and you're the subject matter experts.
Comments?
I was actually out of town.
Susan's already in that mode.
Not everybody talk at once.
No, I was actually on the Township Planning Commission before. Whatever you want to call the thing.
Depends where you're standing.
It does. One of the things that we wrestle with a great deal are the variances. My neighbor got a variance for his deck, and now to the shoreland overlay, and now he's impeding my view of the sunset, and so I need another 5 feet. If those were to be, no. The setback is X, and it's going to remain X, and it's X period. That is one of the things that we see over and over and over again.
You saying setback from the water sides, or are you saying everything?
All
Road?
of,
whatever.
setbacks from the side, setbacks from the water, setbacks from the road. We see those kinds of things where folks are saying, I just want to fudge it a little. Well, then 2 years later, the next guy comes to us and says, well, I just want to fudge it a little. And then we get that, well, I just need a little more. You've been here.
In a short period of time, but I've seen that, but I've also seen where the city is very welcoming to things like attached garages encroaching on that, which I was shocked at the first time I heard that was like a widely accepted thing, that you could encroach on the setback to the road because it's an attached garage. I was very surprised at that, but that seems to be widely accepted.
Historically, I'm sorry.
That comes from years ago where it was pretty much your God-given right to have a garage.
Okay.
That's where it came from.
Yes.
You know, that you're in Minnesota, you have a right to a garage. Now, a right might be a little strong.
No, it is somewhere in the US Constitution and the state constitution that each property and each dwelling, each person who lives in the property shall have access to its own garage. It's in there. I haven't seen it, but I know it's in there.
Okay, so I have a question. So Susan, you and I obviously share, as many others I'm sure do too, as far as setting precedents on variances, which we always want to be mindful of. But it was interesting when we had the legal team here, we were upstairs. There was something that she said about, I can't remember what it is, about a variance that you shouldn't be denying a variance because of X, and it had to do with something precedent setting. And I remember thinking to myself, boy, all this time.
Variances
Any of you
should be
recall
based-
you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, they shouldn't be granted based on precedents. They should be considered each in their own individual
Yeah,
right.
specific to the situation,
Case by
Yep.
case.
which I know we do in a sense, but how do you remove that from wanting to avoid setting precedents down the road?
Well, I think one of the challenges is those aren't necessarily code things. So we can look at our variance language of the appropriateness of approving a variance. A lot of times comes down to this body saying no. And that's hard,
Comes down to
right?
what?
It comes down to this body saying no.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's hard. It's hard to look at, your friends, your neighbors or the community and say, yeah, we understand your neighbor got it, but that was different.
One of the reasons that I am very precedent cognizant is because in the League of Cities training and in Forest Lake's history, we have paid fines and lost legal action because we allowed one and said no to another. And the term arbitrary and capricious comes up and says, well, if you allowed this one, then there's sort of similar situations, so you should allow them both.
But-
And we've had our hands slapped.
I've heard you mention this a number of times. Can you give me one example of what you're talking about? That the city did get sued on?
Let me go back in my memory banks. I mean, Duffy's the big one, but there were a couple of smaller ones.
I mean, I'm speaking generically, just not calling out people, but
Duffy was the big one, and
That was a development, the Duffy development was by where the old hospital is, where Leela is. They built a number of single-family homes, 25, 30. So it would have been back off of 11th, kind of before you get to the church, right back there. And the issue was they were going to put in a number of, don't quote me on this, but I believe it was for women for
Lower income.
rehab. Was it lower income or rehab?
no, it was not rehab, it was lower income.
Lower income, and there was a lot of controversy, a lot of not in my backyard. We denied it, planning commission. We had a lot of members then. Must have been back when we had about 11 on the commission. We denied it, city denied it, we got sued, we lost. Because there was no reason for us to deny the site plan review.
We had, it was one of our first attached residences. We had allowed a couple of those and we said no to this one. Had allowed a couple of lesser setbacks and they were looking for a variance and
it's been more developer and more that situational than individual. Like, hey, my neighbor, got that fence and, mine didn't, I'm gonna sue the city. But I'm just trying to understand in the context of variances and how.
So back to our discussion on the variances, I do think the shoreline ordinance is one of them that we're always here on. That's what the variants are. I mean, the lots are expensive, housing's expensive, they want to build every square inch. They want more than 25%, they want different setbacks, the list, the litany goes on, right? We have a lot of really small lots that we've allowed variances on. And I think it would be appropriate to look at how much we allow. And then is 25% the number? Or to my understanding, it comes from DNR.
It's a DNR thing.
But I understand that that's not statewide. That it's only, if you go down to Lake Minnetonka in that area, they have a different percentage. So I don't know what's true and fiction.
Sure, we definitely, this isn't the first shoreline community that I've worked in. The shoreline ordinances and working with the DNR is confusing. And it is really hard, I think, for municipalities to understand that relationship as well between the city and the DNR and their regulations and what we adopt. And so I already had kind of flagged shoreland as one of those needs lots of conversation pieces, because that is one that I think affects a great deal, not just those along the shoreline itself, but everybody within a certain buffer distance is in the shoreline overlay, and that those percentages and stuff do apply. So yes, shoreline is one of those areas that staff has already flagged as something that's going to need some good work on it.
We kind of have multiple personalities about shoreland. If it's me wanting to build, that's one thing, but then when it's the water quality, I want better water quality, but I want the ability to, and I want stable, you know, I don't want a lot of rise, fall. I want my lake level stable, but I need variances on impervious area, and I need variances on, you know, so we kind of do some multiple personality things sometimes. I get it.
Other ones that come to mind? Have another one? I actually gave it some thought, you know. The downtown area, where you had this big push with this 80-page document, is that need to have something done in order to move that plan forward? I would assume that's something that the council would like.
Can you, so with regard to the downtown plan, can you repeat that?
Well, that requires some ordinance revisions.
Yeah.
Oh,
How do we implement it?
yeah, implementation might require some ordinance amendments, yes.
And, you know, we have a very, I think, a fairly pro-business focus. So then I would be looking at districts that have businesses in them do they need any tweaking to make it easier for them to do business with us?
Yeah.
Housing will come. We already took care of the MXR1, so.
Commissioner Paul, Chair Paul. With, back to the commercial, it can get both into permitted uses, conditional uses, and then design standards, which are a whole thing. So how friendly do you want to be to businesses? Well, how many different uses? Do you want 27 different uses in every district? Or there's some catchphrases we have found that Abby really likes where it says, other uses similar to those listed in the code. And so that's kind of a thing. So that all ties in. If you want to be business friendly, how many rules do you want to have? Well, businesses will say you want fewer rules to make it easier for us. Yet we need to have some control. Tie into parking standards, landscaping standards, surface standards that are all in, those are all layers, pieces, almost every district, but especially the commercial districts.
I think I'm mainly thinking about Broadway, across the freeway, to some extent 61. So not so much the factories that wanted to come in our industrial, but more
The business and the mixed use districts.
yeah, whatever you guys call
Yep.
it.
Whatever that map says.
Susan?
I think that brought up a good one with design standards, because we hear both businesses saying, well, don't tell me what I can build here. And then they also say, but you know, we look really hodgepodge and we don't look like someplace that you want to go visit. So we need design standards, but not on my building. I mean, so, yeah, we go kind of multiple personality on that too.
Kevin, you're,
There's so many things, but, you know, I think more clear, more defined, you know, obviously, Ken was alluding to is open-ended ordinances, we should have more. I think there's always gonna be a need for. Guess that's what I always thought this committee was about, you know, I mean, they always said if you always have to be asking for variance, you should change the code. Some things we just can't change the code on. Say unilaterally, yeah, you can build up to 1 foot of the property line, that would be, I think there's other things that, you know, I think just more clear defined. I think we're still setbacks and very, and it is hard, like you guys said, when you're dealing with. Not gonna like, but we have to try to make it 7 of us, so it's not like, I guess how things should be.
others, I haven't heard from all of you. Feel free to jump in.
Have you all looked at our lot split? Because there are some real changes there, and I think perhaps lot splits might be one that is, we can get our arms around, but it would be one that as more folks come in and they're wanting more, and it would sort of go with some of the other density that y'all are looking for. Perhaps that's an area that we should look at.
From standards or process or both?
Both.
Just for an example, I've worked in cities where if you had a large property, you wanted to divide it into 2 or 3 pieces, that could be handled administratively and wouldn't even have to come to help. More user-friendly, if you will.
We allow a lot split if, not to come to us if it's just taking 1 into 2.
If it is in a previously platted parcel, it just goes to the city council, I believe. It doesn't come before you. So,
I've had lot splits come here.
Yeah.
yeah, there's a few little weird, and again, it's kind of one of those, you remember those like choose your own adventures? Sometimes our code is like that. And I don't mean that in any sort of weird way, but it's kind of like, if this, then you go down this route, you know? And so how we can kind of reevaluate, one, have we over-engineered some of these systems, which I would argue some of them may be, but also how can we maybe align them a little bit better where similar types of things people do might have similar processes. Right now, it's very unique, I think, in the way the code is written, that sometimes it's you and sometimes it's the council and sometimes you make so there's lots of things like that. And it's great. You're an empowered planning commission. Not all cities allow their planning commissions or have granted their planning commissions the powers that you have of approving variances and site plans and use permits and things like that. I think that's great. It helps streamline a lot of the processes and procedures. I just want to look at how we might be able to continue with that momentum of kind of reducing overly burdensome regulatory oversight.
Other areas?
So this is all great. I think unless you were going to continue to ask questions, Chair Gerard, I think this helps us at least see some of the high areas, shoreland, knowing that that's going to be big, zoning districts, and the uses in those districts is going to be big. You know, when it comes down to things like setbacks, I don't plan on probably gonna get in the meat and potatoes. It's gonna be cleaning it up. Remember our MXR1 and I put it in a table? We're gonna put a lot of stuff into tables. This is easier for everybody than a lot of the texts we have. Right now, what I would say is, you just got this memo last Thursday, right? As you're thinking about things over the next couple weeks, even the next couple months as applications come before you, please reach out to Ken and I. If you have any thoughts, if you want to sit down and have a one-on-one, we are more than willing to sit and have the dialogue with you. Seven are the ones that touch these codes the most to really understand how your perceptions of them. Feel free to reach out to us at any point.
We're just getting started.
We're just starting a process, and it's going to be, you know, I firmly want to believe we will have this done in 2 years. It is my goal we have this done in 2 years. We talked for an hour tonight about billboards, so we're gonna try.
I would leave Sign City on.
Signs, I also knew was its own animal, and signs may be one of those things that it gets to be a 3-phase project, right? You do the rest of the zoning code, and then you say, okay, we'll spend the following year on signs, because signs is one that is really hard for cities to do. Any city, doesn't matter what the city is. There's always one hand of the world that thinks we have too much signage, and another hand of the world that says there's never enough. And it's really difficult to have those conversations. And
Plus, if we leave it for a little while, we have some newer commissioner members that will be able to go through different site plans, different signs, and they'll be able to form a decent opinion about them then.
You might be done by then.
that's exactly where this was going.
All right, any final comments on the zoning ordinance rewrite discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to 7C, wetland banking discussion.
So this isn't as much of a discussion as a high-level introduction. I know last year, Nathan First with Bolton and Mink had introduced you to wetland banking. We have a couple new commissioners. I don't remember who was all here at the time, so I wanted to start a little bit of reignite this conversation on wetland banking. Because we have initiated a moratorium on wetland banking within the city. A moratorium is a pause, it's a timeout. And it just says, we're not gonna allow new of this thing until we've had a time to figure out, do we want to allow it? Where do we want to allow it? Moratoriums by state law expire within 1 year or the time we adopt a new ordinance, but whichever comes first, if that makes sense. You can't say that. It'll expire in a year unless we adopt something sooner. So by June 13th of this year, we need to either have adopted an ordinance or gone through some analysis to say, yes, banking is allowed or something or other. So, or not. Wetland banking is the creation of new, or in some cases, preserved or restored wetlands. And the purpose of the creation or preservation, restoration of these wetlands is for the development of a for-purchase credit. So you create a wetland somewhere else that other people can buy, theoretically, to offset the wetlands that they mitigate as part of their development. According to state law, the Board of Soil and Water Resources, Bowser, is their nickname. If you hadn't heard that or you hear that, Bowser. Sounds like a good dog's name, I feel like.
Mario Brothers, Bowser.
What's that?
Mario Brothers, Bowser.
Is that a dog in Mario?
That was what?
It's the singer,
Okay.
Sha-na-na.
All right,
Okay,
so
I digress.
John Bowser,
Well-
Shauna.
wetland bank service areas, there's I think 10 of them within the state, and they encompass major watersheds into a region. And Forest Lake is within 2 of the wetland bank service areas. So when a developer in our community says, hey city, hey watersheds, I need to fill a little of this wetland. And if they have to mitigate it, they either have to create new wetland as part of their development, somewhere on their development, or they can create it elsewhere within the wetland, or they can buy credits. But the kick is they got to create it within their bank service area, or they've got to purchase within their bank service area. So there is definitely a benefit to the community in that the credits, you want to be able to have credits available in your bank service area in the event wetland impacts occur. In the staff report, I noted that in our local watershed, we don't currently have any banks within the city limits, but within both of our local watersheds, there are a number of banks, or within our bank service area, there's a number of banks. Bank number 7, or the bank service area number 7, serves the majority of the Twin Cities metro area. There are lots of wetland banks in that area 7. There are less in area 6. That's the area that encompasses more of Washington County. All the water's draining to the St. Croix, but there's still available credits in that area.
Can I ask
Yeah.
So we have these areas, so they're not by geographical boundaries, by watershed boundaries, or by some other
They-
magical State Department thing?
Watershed boundaries are a geographical boundary based on hydrology.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if we would create watershed banks, do we have to allow other cities to be able to use them, or can we regulate that if it's in our city to be developed, they can use our bank?
That is something I'll look into. I
This-
don't know exactly, but I do believe that there are ways to create them and restrict them. Ultimately, it is up to the local jurisdiction when creating a bank to allow the bank or not. And so I can definitely check on that. There are some things like this, questions that you have about this, that we will explore through this process.
To me, this is the big deal. It is this banking. I don't want to give up developable land because some other community wants to fill a lot and they want to take my developable land. It doesn't make sense to me.
I mean, it's a
Kevin?
great, go ahead.
So if I'm understanding what Paul's asking and what you said is, if we right now don't have any banks in our district, if a developer came in and wanted to develop a project that we have in our community, fill in a wetland, they could purchase a bank in one of the other areas. They can purchase credits in the other area,
They can purchase credit within that bank service
whether
area.
we had a bank in our area or not.
Correct.
So we
Well-
wouldn't necessarily lose the development,
We wouldn't lose the
because
development
they could purchase
if there
those.
were credits available in our bank service area.
But the other community would have to allow us to go to there, right?
I think the other, it would have to be based on the regulations of the creation of the bank. I don't know that. That's something
It's
I
got to
will.
be in that bank somewhere.
I do know in looking, yes, it's got to be in that bank service area. And I do know that in looking online right now, there are credits available for purchase for people in our bank service areas. It doesn't look like there's restrictions on them.
Area 7 and area 6.
Yes, we are split
six.
in
We're in
area
six.
7 and 6.
We're both, yeah.
Yep, we're in both.
So 7 would be Rice Creek and 6 would be Comfort Lake, Forest Lake.
I'm still here. I'm just writing notes, so.
But it's all right. I
I
didn't
kinda
really
hide
want to
behind this
derail the
big screen.
train,
Susan had a question.
but we'll let it further be derailed.
That's fine.
Okay, this is a big deal to us because a lot of the development that would like to be done in our downtown needs banking credits. We've
Can I-
got,
Can I just stop really quick? The city is working on a project for stormwater mitigation of the downtown area. It is different than a banking project. We are working in coordination with Forest Lake, Comfort Lake Watershed District, that we would actually create a system. It's not a wetland, it's a stormwater pond, like a regional stormwater pond. So very similar theory, but not necessarily a wetland impact. It's to treat stormwater. So this well, if somebody downtown had a wetland and they were impacting that wetland, then this program would affect them. But most of our downtown development isn't necessarily have a whole lot of wetlands on them. They've got more of the stormwater requirements. So there are two separate programs there.
The other thing, this is a big deal for Forest Lake, is that we have a lot of area in our community that families would like to hold on to that are not really super developable because they are wet, because they have ephemeral streams. There may be some ways to help keep some of our rural character if we choose areas where we could say, yes, this makes sense for a bank, and there would be a way for a rural landowner to get some dollars and be able to keep a place that is less developed. Our forest, lake, that kind of.
So in the staff report, I noted the land use analysis, just really high level. Part of this moratorium is we have to analyze the wetland banking and its, pros, cons, everything about that. So part of this, currently in the city, we have 38% of the area is not developed. 16% of the land area is agricultural. 35.4% of the community is water. That is our surface water, and that includes our national wetland inventory. So the map you see on the screen right now, everything, all those yellow pockets that are over the zoning, and I know it's kind of funky the way you see it, all those are wetlands. Those are wet areas, and that doesn't include anything like a wetland buffer that might be imposed. And as we all know, that if you get a wetland on your property and you have it delineated, it just got bigger, right? Like that's just the way it works. And so our 35.4% area, water area is probably much larger than we really actually think right now. Wetland areas, their buffer areas, and any wetland banking areas are usually encumbered by a conservation easement, meaning that those lands will forever be in conservation. Generally, lands with conservation easements on them hold little tax value. That's not to say that they are undesirable or unvalued properties. They've got more intrinsic value than monetary value, but there are also maybe concerns just in terms of a tax base. So further analysis, just that staff includes some of the constraints to outright prohibiting a program of this nature are some of the unintended consequences. So currently, when we reconstruct a road, we have to, and if we were to, have a wetland maybe that developed in a ditch and it's going to be impacted, we have to create that wetland someplace else, or we have to buy credit elsewhere. That's something that the city has to do right now for all of any public infrastructure project. If we allowed for wetland banking within the community, the city could potentially, as we are doing with stormwater, create a bank for our use, or restore a bank or something like that, restore a wetland. The private development area, if we go back that slide, we've got a lot of yellow pockets in those areas that are slated. Oh, my pointer doesn't work here. A lot of areas slated for development that have wetlands on them. The ability for a developer to fill some of those wetlands, maybe not all of them, and actually mitigate that elsewhere is allowing for still allowing for community growth and development. Some of the opportunities, as Commissioner Young had said, the idea of creating new wetland or restoring new wetland in areas that already have a lot of wetlands, like our Conservancy District, where you might be filling in gaps between two areas that are already really wet. Those are sorts of things that might be very appropriate in the community. And then also when wetland banking might be a part of a larger development plan. So the city does have one bank that has since expired. The credits are no longer valid. That was called Fairview Farms. It was a part of Forest Lake Township. It's down over in the southwest corner of the city. And as part of that development, this is off of 190th, the map you see in the lower right-hand corner. A lot of wetlands were preserved and created as part of a kind of a rural residential single-family development. And so staff thinks that in areas where we can maybe incorporate, or a developer could incorporate wetland banking as part of a larger development plan, so that we are still maybe getting houses or tax base or business or whatever it may be, might also be appropriate. So as of right now, that's the analysis that staff has done. I appreciate already some of the dialogue, and I look forward to any of the other questions the commission has that we should probably start exploring.
So trying to understand, and I think I understand, but we're not necessarily, so let's say we decided to be our own wetland bank right here in town, as an example. Are we actually, we're not actually creating wetlands, we're banking, we are creating wetlands,
We
we're
would
not just
be-
banking money like a park dedication fee and using that funds for something?
Correct.
We're actually creating more wetlands.
We are actually creating more
Where there's
wetlands.
already wetlands,
Pardon?
in areas where there's already wetlands?
You
potentially?
can potentially already, you can enhance, restore. They might not have as much credit value, or you might have to have more acreage of restored than new. But there is the opportunity for the city to create a bank, which would be the actual physical wetland. Then there's credit assigned to that could be purchased from private developers, or we could use to offset our own mitigation.
And that money is used in the city, or what happens with the money?
Yep, so Bowser is the financial, is the holder, everything passes through Bowser. There is an administrative transaction fee for every credit purchased or sold. Initially, the money would probably go to pay back any debts incurred on the creation or restoration of the wetland. But then, yes, that money could be used for a specific public purpose. So be that new water quality improvement projects, or parkland dedication projects, or the creation of more wetlands, or stormwater, or whatever that may be.
For anything, more road improvement.
I think we would need to, if we would allow it for a public purpose, we'd probably want to designate what that purpose would
But
be.
as a city, we would control that versus if we were buying credits from another area.
Correct. Yeah, we would be buying credits, our money would go out the door, versus we would have the opportunity, as much as any private developer could have the opportunity to do this as well.
Justin?
We are wanting to designate kind of where these potential banking areas might be, correct?
Do we want to consider them? And if we want to consider them, where?
Okay, so this is where I'm trying to wrap my head around. So if you have roads, for example, that we're trying to improve, or MnDOT, for example, is trying to improve, would it be better to have the bankable wetlands for that purpose more out in the areas that are not being developed? Also ones in areas that are to be developed because they attract, or some people who like wetlands, let's say, around developments. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, so
I mean, just
So
thinking
what-
that there's going to be some more value on each area, the development side, and versus like the southeast area of Forest Lake,
right.
where having a wetland bank is probably not really that huge. However, but if MnDOT or the city is doing road stuff, using that bankable area versus development.
I see what you're saying is making,
Instead of pooling the wetland bank in one area, but having it in each area for different, because you don't want to be banking all the areas in like the Southwest where we're doing a lot of development currently.
well, so what
Am
we
I
would,
understanding that correctly?
yeah, so it would end up probably being by zoning district of where we would allow it. And so when staff had mentioned the Conservancy District as one opportunity, that southwest corner, so what you see is a teal on your map right now, that's zoned the Conservancy District. And that's already a highly wet area, right? But there might be the ability to fill in the puzzle pieces. So
Southeast or southwest?
southeast, excuse me. So, so those landowners themselves, or, whoever bought the land, could create a bank. And they would generate the revenue from that bank. Now, there's also land up in the southeast corner or northeast corner, that's Conservancy as well, There's land on the west side, which is the WMA, and then the city does actually own some conservancy zone land in Bixby Park. So there are areas of the city, pretty spread out, but that's not to say, so what I think I'm hearing you say is you like the idea of spreading those out some, but excluding them to just the conservancy areas could pose a risk if there were developments that wanted to incorporate them in some way.
Yeah, because if these are in perpetuity, then obviously we're not wanting, bankable wetlands, like let's say in the, over by the Y, or, places where, the development is really happening. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, so I think you wouldn't want to see them like in an MXR district,
Right.
right? Because that's the area that we're encouraging residential development, unless they were doing it as part of a larger residential development.
Right, so that was my point. Like, if it's something where it's going to improve that development because people like that natural wetland, you want to have some there, but yet you also want to have some in areas that aren't going to take up that developmental land. Okay.
I know what you're saying, and I'm making notes. I've
So,
got, yeah.
If I may, Mr. Chair, so I think Justin's example is, let's say you had an 80-acre PUD, all sorts of land types existing in there. Maybe there's 50 acres that could really be built on, but maybe there's 20 or 30 acres of low area.
Right.
Maybe they enhance those, make them better wetlands, build up some wetland credits, but yet that's still in a developable
exactly.
area.
Yep.
Versus just in the conservancy area, which is rural, never going to be developed for a very low density, if at all. Putting extra or more wetlands in those areas makes perfect sense.
If I may, can I just add one little quick thing? Is MnDOT required then, by within its law, to replace as well? Okay.
In Washington County.
Okay.
Susan?
And what we call the big swamp is that big green blob in the southeast. And if the city is looking at things, there is a DNR wildlife management area in there. It links up to White Rock Lake and to Big Marine, and you have a lot of wildlife corridor that works that area, big swamp and in there. You're not gonna have any water or sewer lines or development in that area if I ever have one in my great-granddaughter's lifetime. It just isn't gonna happen. But some of that is not really good quality wetland, and in fact, that new iron removing, or that iron sand, on County Road 50, the
Judicial District 6.
no, it's not
It's an iron enhanced sand
Thank you.
filtration project that the watershed district is doing.
they just put it in this fall. So in terms of having an area, if we thought about doing some wetland improvements we would be able to leverage some stuff that DNR wants, some stuff that the watershed district wants, some stuff that would make some really good sense to leverage water quality and wildlife and habitat in the Big Marine, this area. It makes a lot of sense.
I agree. I think that there are also property owners down there that could potentially benefit, that, may have part of their land that are in agricultural operations, but have some lowlands that they'd never be able to develop anyways. This might, even if it is a lesser quality, I think that the Bowser's wetland banking standards allow for, if you improve the quality of that wetland, that it might be eligible for credits. So what I'm hearing so far, I've heard from quite a number of you, is that outright prohibition might not be appropriate, but that we wouldn't want to see it in these areas that we're probably guiding in our 2030, 2040 MUSA as urban development, unless that can be encompassed as part of some sort of development plan. Those areas that are less likely to be developed, such as the Conservancy District or some of those undeveloped areas, may be more appropriate as well. And that we would want to explore local restriction to make any banks that get created in the city, certainly our banks, that they would be eligible for local development.
I mean, is there a way to prior?
Other comments? Any other
What are
information the
next
city would
steps on
like?
this one?
So I do see it, just a couple faces out there that I see there's more thoughts, just like the zoning code. If you have anything later on, you're sitting at home, can't fall asleep at night, tomorrow, email us, feel free to give me a call or Ken. We're happy to, please don't call us if you're sitting at home later and you can't fall asleep. But shoot us an email, whatever, we're happy to sit down and have one-on-ones if people have ideas or have more questions. This is something that as we move forward, it's gonna go a little quicker. We have 4 months to get the ordinance done. But next steps, the city council will be discussing this at their we're in February. Their February 21st workshop agenda, work session. It'll come back to you 1 month from today, March 8th. It's a slight change on the agenda. The agenda says they would be discussing it on Monday. We had to kind of do a little bit of a switcheroo. We want to make sure we have full council present when we're talking about wetland banking. Planning Commission will come back for you with some more of this dialogue. We'll probably have some of those answers you're wondering about. City Council discussion end of March. We're aiming for public hearing in April, and then recommendations and public hearing with City Council May 10th. Building in a good month in each of those public hearing times, just in case we need to table a little bit longer. So we're on track for a potential June ordinance, actually having something in place before that moratorium gets done.
And this is a way for some of those folks to be able to keep property in families.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Wouldn't otherwise be able to do that. And I consider that a value.
we were talking, the end of last year about those compatible land uses in agricultural districts, and I do think that wetland banking when in appropriate areas, right? I agree that with Commissioner Brink, that taking some of our highest and driest land and converting it to a wetland bank, though has some benefit to the community and to that landowner, it doesn't necessarily help the fact that we're a developing community and we do want to create more residential development and improve our tax base and all of those sorts of things. So I have enough direction. If anybody has any other questions or comments, I'm happy to take them.
Hearing none, we'll move on to our section 8, other. Do we have, excuse me, do we have Councilperson Roberts on tonight? Okay, so Abby, we'll start with you.
Councilmember Roberts did let me know he wouldn't be here tonight. He had a pre-scheduled vacation before he knew he was going to be the liaison to this commission. Just as a heads up, we did advertise, so the city council funded a community development assistant position this year. So it's a slight administrative role, slight zoning role, really helps the community development department get back to its 2013 staffing levels. The position's first round of reviews occurred on Monday this week. We had 65 applicants for the position, which was really great to see. Some really well-qualified candidates. We'll be dwindling, I think that was some combination of two words. We'll be paring that down into a little bit more of a manageable group for first round of interviews in the next week. And I'm hoping, I don't know that it would be your meeting, but maybe by the end of March for sure, we'd have somebody on board that would help us in some of the ways that Deputy Clerk Karen has been doing these last few years, that can kind of shift her back into a council lead role and really help us in the Planning Commission. So keep you guys posted on that. Just know you might see a new name and face coming up in the next month or so. That's all I have right now.
All right, questions for Abby?
I have one. Are these is there any requirement for somebody that's working for the city to live in the city?
I
Not legal?
don't know necessarily that we do.
It's come up several times in several cities, and it is not consistent with state law.
Ken?
Just fielding a lot of phone calls, a lot of people, I think, gearing up for spring. Including somebody wants to tear down a house and build a new one on the lake, and guess what? They need some variances. But it's just, we won't be lacking for work. So that's good, that's why we're here.
Very good. Karen?
I was just gonna mention, since we talked a lot about the zoning codes, because we have new members, I will email out a link to where you can find our city code, where you can find the zoning code, and you can just, pure reading enjoyment. But I'll make sure that everybody has that link to the codes.
Thank you. Geneva?
Well, I got to thinking about our discussions and the variances and the not in my backyard type of mentality. And it does seem like people in general only review it from their point of view when it's something that they either don't want or do want, which is why it makes this difficult task that we have. And I don't know how we're ever really going to please everyone, or we're not even maybe going to please most people, which I think all that we can do is do the best we can with the information that we have. And maybe when we do make decisions, especially when they're controversial, like building something in my backyard, we might want to think about the narrative about how that thing you don't want in your backyard might actually help the overall picture. Like in the case where you have housing that is for people who don't have as much money as some other people, or mental health, and you put a facility, where people need, everybody's saying we need to do something about mental health, but don't put it in my backyard. So maybe we should find people who can help us educate our community on to why it's really not a bad thing to do this and get that out there, because we do have to make difficult decisions, but ultimately it's going to be good for all of us. So that's all I got.
Thank you. Justin? Kevin? Susan?
Brief commercial announcement, if anybody has a nonprofit that they would like to help raise money for, the Rotary Plunge is your opportunity. There is still time to put a team together, and there are still time to be a plunger. flrotary.org.
That's not a toilet, that's a lake.
And the plunge is on
It was not a
February
plunger.
18th.
It is the plunge, and it is a Rotary Plunge on February 18th. And we are go.
Saturday.
We have backup plans in case suddenly it turns 90 degrees and we lose some lake ice. So we're solid.
All right. Don?
Nothing.
Jeff?
Nothing, but thank you very much for, so far, the first night experience has been very eye-opening, and I appreciate all your input as well and learning.
All right. Well, welcome to the Planning Commission. It's great to have a full commission. It's been quite a while. So, it's like any other opportunity. It's always death by fire hose to begin with, but you'll do just fine.
Thank you, sir.
I have nothing. So with that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
I have a motion. Can I have a second?
I'll second it.
Got a motion and a second. It's a non-debatable motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you all very much for your service this evening. Look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks.
So the next few sessions that we have on our calendar probably will occur.
Well, for sure, February 22nd. Depending on application submittal, deadline is Monday. Is it? Based on what we might have on March 8th, that one could end up getting canceled. We've pushed that wetland conversation a couple weeks. Right now, we don't have a lot of pending development. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know.
She's jinxing it. She says that.
Yeah,